Greetings, music nerds, and welcome to Season 7 of the Music Makers and Soul Shakers podcast. I'm your host, Steve Dawson, coming to you from the Hen House Studio here in East Nashville, Tennessee. I'm so glad you've chosen to join me once again as we take some deep dives with a cast of wonderful musicians, producers, and engineers that I've managed to track down and speak to about making music, records, and just doing what they do in their lives in music. Don't forget there's a link to a playlist on Spotify and Apple Music with links to many of the songs we discuss on today's episode. You'll find links to those playlists in the show notes below or at our website. Meanwhile, the show continues to be largely listener-supported. Your help in keeping the show going is always appreciated, and you can do it with a one-time donation or a Patreon subscription, which is a monthly payment of your choice. And when you sign up for Patreon, you get an ad-free version of the show to listen to, as well as getting entered to win a cunning prize pack from our sponsors at the end of the season. Or if you're tight for dough and you still want to help out, you can subscribe for free on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or just by spreading the word, sharing the show, following us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, and telling all your pals about it. You can get links to all this stuff at makersandshakerspodcast.com. Meanwhile, a huge thanks to the sponsors this season. Please check them out and let them know I sent you. They are Union Tube and Transistor, Spectra 1964, the Deering Banjo Company, Mule Resophonic Guitars, and the Hen House Hang. All right, thanks so much to you for tuning in, and let's get down to it. Howdy, music nerds, and welcome to the show. This is episode number 151, and my guest today is a killer songwriter, singer, and guitar player, now living in Eastern Canada, maybe Halifax, I can't remember exactly where, Afie Jurvanen, better known as Bahamas. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I sure appreciate you joining me this week. I just got back from Vancouver, where I do this annual show, and had such a blast playing there once again. I run a house band that's pretty epic. 2 drummers, 2 keyboard players, me and another guitar player, a horn section, and I put together all this music, and we back up 10 artists, mostly singers, doing songs from an album that I choose. And this year it was Highway 61 Revisited. It was a riot. That's a lot of words on that album, a lot of lyrics, but everyone rose to the occasion, and we made a huge racket, and it was a lot of fun. So now I'm back to work here, mixing a bunch of albums that I started a while back, so jumping right back into it. I should mention that we've just announced the Hen House Hang dates for 2024. You've heard me talking about that before, but the 2024 dates are out now, and so it's registration if you're interested in going. We've also added another version of the Hang that's just focused on mixing. So that's just with me instead of another engineer and a bunch of musicians. It's not going to be that. It's just going to be me talking about mixing and showing you the techniques that I use and how to go about it. So if you want to come and hang and learn about that, that's what we'll be doing. And so the mixing hang is going to be March 23rd and 24th of 2024. And the main Hen House Hang, the one where you come for 3 days and take in a complete session from the ground up with a live band, will be in September again, and the dates are September 23rd to 25th. So you can get all the info, and you can now sign up for a spot at stevedawson.ca. There's some links on the front page there. There's only 8 spots for each event, so get on it if you're interested, and hope to see you there. Also, just a reminder that we'll be giving away a bunch of cool prizes from our sponsors at the end of the season, which is coming up in a couple months, I guess. And we're going to have some killer Union Tube and Transistor pedals up for grabs, which are awesome. And some other stuff from our other sponsors. You just have to be a Patreon subscriber to be entered, and the winner will be picked from there. And I'd just like to shout out to a couple of new Patreon members this week who were generous enough to help support the show. So many thanks to Dean Worley and Jacob Sanders. You guys are cool. Thank you. All right, on to this week's show. So Afie Jurvanen is on today, and he's best known as Bahamas. He's made 6 records now under that name, with the newest one called Bootcut just released a few weeks ago. And it's a killer record, and I guess will be sort of pinned as his country record, I say with floating quotation marks in the air. Although I don't think it's that, really, but I think that's what people will call it. He did make it in Nashville, and he used a bunch of seasoned session players for the recordings, including Vince Gill and Russ Pahl on steel, who's been on the show. So it does have that flavor, But Afie's no dummy, and he had the vision to incorporate elements of country music into what he does without changing his own approach or his own sound that much. And it works really, really well. I should also point out that Dave Rowe plays bass on this record, and he passed away just a couple weeks ago after we had this conversation. So that's why we don't mention it. But we do talk about him, and he was a real legend around here. He played with Johnny Cash for years and then was a mainstay around town in studios. And I used to see him playing a lot with like Jim Oblon and Kenny Vaughan and people like that. Anyway, RIP to Dave Rowe, the great bassist. Afie's always made really interesting choices when he's making records, almost as if he's trying to challenge himself. We talk a bit about his Earthtones album that was really wicked too and featured Pino Paladino on bass and James Gadson on drums, which is an insane lineup and such a cool record. Earthtones, check that one out. If you don't know James Gadson's playing, then you need to go right now onto YouTube and search Gadson Bill Withers. And what comes up almost near the top, I think, is a live performance of them doing Use Me, you know that song, Use Me. And it's on the old gray whistle test. And it's from 1972. So go check that out right now. It's really slow and greasy. And it's like an encyclopedia on how to play drums and guitar. Bill Withers' guitar playing is so cool. And it's just like straight eighth notes, but it's like so groovy and wicked. So much soul. Anyway. Back on track here. Afie also spent some time as a side guy and did a bunch of sessions around his old hometown of Toronto through the early 2000s before landing a touring gig with Feist. And he played with her for quite a while, maybe a couple of years. I'm not totally sure, but quite a while. And then after that, he set out on his own. And that's where the Bahamas adventure begins. And it started with Pink Strat, his 2009 record, and goes right through the recent one, Bootcut. So go listen to all his records and enjoy them. They're really happening. Great writing, great singing, great guitar playing, great tones. Meanwhile, you can keep up to date with Afie's touring at bahamasmusic.net. And with that, please enjoy my conversation with Afie Jurvanen, a.k.a. Bahamas.
You've been down there for a long time though, right?
I have lived here for 10 years.
Yeah. Love it?
I do love it. Yeah.
The center of the universe.
Yeah, man. Totally. You probably spent a bit of time over here, right?
A little bit. Some friends of mine's some musicians that operate on the higher plane there. You know, they took me to some restaurants over there, drank natural wine.
Yeah, that's
crust pizza.
That's how you roll over here.
Yeah, it was pretty fancy stuff for sure.
Cool. Well, thanks for doing this, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So I don't know if you remember, but I think I've met you a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
But the one time for sure, the first time was I'm pretty sure was up in Whitehorse.
I remember
I think it was the Frostbite Festival. I think that's what it was called.
Yeah, and you were working with that amazing vocal group.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I forgot about that. I didn't remember why I was there. That was the Sojourners.
Yeah, they were fantastic.
And I don't know if you were even Bahamas then. Were you?
Yeah, I mean, it was basically, I just played with a drummer, Jason, at that time, and the two of us played as a duo, you know. And yeah, that's I did that for many years, you know.
Just as the duo was like the touring machine for that period?
I mean, I didn't, for the first little bit, I didn't have any of those nice Canadian subsidies. And so that's what I could afford. And I liked the sound of it too. It was kind of like the punk rock part of me was kind of into that. And and it just sort of meant that the drums could occupy a very different space. And it was less groove oriented and more just raw energy. And anyway, I liked playing that way a lot. And then when I was able to afford it, I hired two singers. So then we had a drums, guitar, and two singers, and that toured like that for quite a while. And you know, and then at some point I succumbed to the lure of the bass player, and
well, bass is a big part of your records. Like I'm kind of surprised you held out as long as you did.
It's true. The guy that plays with my touring band actually played on my first two albums. Darcy Ace is a phenomenal player. He's played with lots of different people, and Darcy, and I've had the fortune to play with lots of great players, and I love playing bass. I have a bass. I mean, nobody ever calls me to play bass on their records, but I love playing bass. I mean, I would love to someday just get the phone call to be like, "We need your help. There's nobody else that can do it, and you're the guy." But I play more like Ron Wood, or I just play guitar on the bass, and there's something so satisfying about that, you know. Do
you ever play bass on your records?
Yeah, a fair bit. Yeah. I do. Like on all the records, actually, there's always like one or two songs where
Oh,
I
really?
end up just like redoing the bass or yeah, I'm not sure for whatever reason. That's pretty typical. That tends to happen a fair bit.
Do you ever write with the bass, or are you always like on the guitar when you do that stuff?
No, I don't really write with the bass. I do. Bass is like something where like I love playing along with records. Um,
Yeah.
and not even necessarily learning the bass line from the song, but I just love, for whatever reason, that instrument is something that I love, just sort of like, grooving and jamming along at home and stuff with that on that instrument. But I very rarely do I do that on guitar, actually. But yeah, anyway, it's a fun instrument. But
When you were kicking around in the Toronto scene, like in the early 2000s, and you were doing a lot of guitar playing for people, did you ever get any bass gigs at that point?
I mean, after I had played with Feist, the band, that version of the band kind of ended. She came off the road, and essentially, we were all unemployed. And then she phoned me for like she was doing one gig at the Olympics in Whistler, and
Oh, yeah.
she wanted to put together a totally different version of the band. She had a whole choir, like singers and keyboard, like just a really interesting band. And I played the bass for that one gig, and it was like the funnest Feist
Cool.
gig. I mean, I played with her for a few years and really enjoyed it. It was a real highlight for me professionally to be a little part of her world for a couple of years there. But that one gig, I just loved it. But the irony was that it was like so bitterly cold. And the tour manager, like an hour before we went on, he went out and bought like merino wool undergarments for everybody, and I played bass with gloves on, and like it was just the craziest gig, but it was so fun. But the phone hasn't rang since then, so I don't know. Maybe I blew it.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that Olympics. Those couple of weeks, actually, that whole month surrounding the Olympics was so like as a Vancouver musician, because I was living there at the time. I mean, it was like a bonanza of crazy. I did so many crazy gigs that week. It was
And like no matter where the gig was, they all felt like privates. They all were like so corporate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just like every stage sort of had a lot of corporate money behind it. Shocking, actually, but I still have the laminate in my garage there.
I did one like in Robson Square, and like an outdoor gig, and I was playing like almost like John Fahey kind of style, like really quiet, weird, half improvised instrumental acoustic guitar music.
Wow.
And they had these like flamethrowers shooting out from the stage beside, like as I was playing, which made no sense, but they were that's how they were rolling in those for those weeks.
Pretty cool.
A lot of pyrotechnics.
Pretty cool. At the time, I probably like made jokes about it or something, but as you get older, you in my case, you start to realize, geez, that was pretty awesome to be a part of that, and how much gratitude I have for that. Even as
were you on the televised thing at all with her
for the Olympics?
Yeah.
What?
Were you guys part of the opening ceremony or anything?
I'm not even sure if it was televised. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised actually, but I smoked a lot of weed back then, so I was kind of a little unaware. There may have been camera around. Yeah, I was a little unaware of what was going on sometimes. Hopefully I was still charming and able to hold it down on the bass.
I think my buddy Bob Chemis was your guitar tech. Is that, am I remembering that correctly? Yeah.
And everyone's buddy, Bob Chemis. He's such a great guy. I saw him a couple of weeks ago. Actually, I was in Vancouver for a show, and he sent me a text saying that he was having his birthday party in a park. And so I stopped by there and hung out with him a little bit. It was nice to see him.
Oh, wicked. Yeah, I saw him here too. He was doing some stuff with Elvis Costello. And
yeah, he's always out with Elvis now. It sounds like a pretty plush gig. Yeah, gets to touch a lot of jazz masters.
That's right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this new record of yours, man. So Bootcut is coming out. I can't remember when exactly, but
comes out Friday.
I got my mitts on it a couple of weeks ago. Awesome. Yeah. That's exciting. And you made that here in Nashville at Sound Emporium.
I did. Have you worked there?
I have worked at Sound Emporium. Yeah. It's a pretty legendary room.
Yes. I can't say I've worked in any other studios actually in Nashville. So but yeah, I really enjoyed it. That is a room, and I'm sure there are others that have this quality, but that room certainly, like, you can stand anywhere and it sounds good in there. Like the bathroom sounds good and the hallway sounds good. And I feel like back then when they were building studios, maybe there just wasn't environmental regulations in the same way, or building codes were different. I just feel like there's so much asbestos and like cancer causing materials in there that are in the floor and in the walls, and it just sounds so good. It's crazy.
You're right about that for sure. Over here, I live really close to Dave Rawlings and Gillian Welch's place, and they were sort of like revamping some stuff, and he was at the time he was sourcing asbestos filled tiles so that he could be like,
are you serious?
Yeah. He wanted to be period correct and like get the right.
Because normally, the easiest thing to do is to just make a room dead, right? Like that's kind of usually the solution, is just to like, if it doesn't have a pleasing live sound, you just like baffle it, whether it's with egg cartons or moving blankets or whatever you use. But this place was weird because it really like we recorded a fair bit with the upright bass and the drums all in the same room, and they weren't that far from each other.
Yeah.
And if you muted the bass, you would assume that there'd be a ton of drums in it.
Yeah.
But there wasn't. It was just like something about the floor is just so solid, and things aren't traveling in the same way. That being said, they're not dead. They're still alive. They're still breathing and interacting with other things. So there's really a magic alchemy to a room like that. And it was a thrill to work there for sure.
Was that your idea? Like, had you been there and you wanted to work there, or was it your producers? I know Dan Nobler worked on this record, and I know he likes working there.
Well, during the lockdowns, I had done this series called Live to Tape, where I work with musicians who'd be in LA or Nashville, and I'd be here in Nova Scotia, and we would record together, and then sort of stitch it up afterwards. And we made this YouTube series, and that was quite fun. And so the band worked at Sound Emporium when we did that.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, some of the guys that we ended up using on the Bootcut record were on that original session. And so it just sounded so good. I just said, man, that sounded good. And then I realized that like Don Williams cut most of his records there, and he's a huge hero for me. I just love those albums. Like, it's actually this guy, Garth Fundus, is the producer on a lot of those records, and I don't know if he works very much anymore, but anyway, it was essentially his studio for a period there. Like, that's where he worked. And I'm not like a terribly nostalgic person or like in general, but it was cool when we actually got there, and like the congas are like, those are the congas that have been sitting there in that corner of the room forever. And that's the, B3, and that's the piano. And like, so it's just kind of cool that they haven't really messed with it too much. I'd imagine like when a big A-level band comes in there, they probably empty the room, and there's like flight cases in the hallway with just boats of guitars and all that stuff. But we kind of just went in there and used what they had, and it sounded really good.
Yeah. So you were in there, like, give me an idea of how you guys rolled through the session. Was it like a week or something that you were in there, or how long did it take?
I think we were in there for 4 days. And Dan Nobler was the co-producer, and he helped like with the charts and sort of, I'd send him some of my just phone recordings of the songs I wanted to do. And we ended up doing 18 songs, which was cool. So I mean, like that whole method of working down there is really off of charts for the most part.
Yeah.
And we would do 2 or 3 takes of a tune, and that was kind of it. I wish I could say it was like a real struggle, but in fact, it was just the opposite. It was a real joy, and the musicians are just such a high caliber, and also I think just the maturity, in any field, whether it's music or anything else, when you start working with people who are in their 60s and 70s, they just have that much more experience to draw from, and they have that quiet confidence that you can kind of, you can lean on as a singer and as a performer, as a writer. Yeah, you can totally trust that. Yeah. And there were very few instances where I was sort of asking people to do something or play something. I'd just start playing a song, and people would kind of naturally find the place. And that's usually the case in my experience. I'm sure you feel the same. But when you work with great players, you often don't have to. You don't talk about what you want to do.
Yeah, exactly.
You just if there's something going on that doesn't feel right, it's just apparent to everyone at the same time, and then you kind of all make a shift and a change. And a lot of that stuff happens silently or just musically, and maybe that's a better word or something. It's just all that conversing and problem solving is just happening in real time. And so yeah, it was it was easy. I hate to say it was. I wish it was a better story. I wish it was like, oh, we toiled and we worked until 4 a.m. But no, we play. Thankfully, I had a lot of material to draw from, and we played a lot of songs, and we had a nice lunch and had good conversations too. So it was just a thrill to hang out with those guys for a few days.
Yeah, I find the pace down here is really bonkers. Like it's, I'm sort of in the middle somewhere. Like the pace that I used to work at in Vancouver was one thing, and the pace that I work at being a Vancouver raised person here is a different pace. But then there's the Nashville. If I go in to play like pedal steel or guitar or something on a session, the pace of the whole day is so crazy. It's like 1 or 2 takes, move on to the next thing. And that's how everyone down here is used to working. And I find when you slow that down a little bit, interesting things happen. Like some people get really antsy. I don't know if you noticed that, or people, maybe they didn't do that on your session, but some of those guys that have been at it forever, they're used to cutting, 6 songs a day. And when you slow that down to like 2, 3 songs a day, or even 4, I know some of those guys, like some of those top call session guys, are just like, well, I mean, we just did it. Why do we need to do it again? Was there any of that going on?
Yeah, there was. I think it's really just that energy that, like, often the first day has an energy because people are getting their headphone balanced and you're getting sound, you're making sure the sound is, there's a problem with the cable, engineers running in and out of the room. And then, so that first day often has that stop and start feeling, which can be a little frustrating because everyone's really excited to just get playing.
Yeah.
And I have learned now, for quite a while now, I've just kind of tried to take more of a Neil Young approach or a David, in order to protect that initial energy. I just don't even come to the studio until they're kind of like ready to go.
Yeah.
And it's not, there's no part of me that wants to be like a rock star or anything like that. But I don't want to like miss out on that initial energy.
Yeah, I
don't mind doing multiple takes. I don't romanticize like, the idea of like not rehearsing or no demos, like whatever works for people. But for me, I just want to like, as close to possible as that initial dialogue.
That's important.
That's important. So, I try and just let the engineers and the producers and everything get, like, I don't need to be there when they're smacking on the snare drum and stuff like that. It's just like, you just end up drinking like 6 cups of coffee, and the session starts at 10 a.m. and you're not actually, yeah, exactly. And in fact, I found, on day 2 or 3, then everyone's in a groove. Everyone shows up in the morning, gets their coffee, and you basically start working right away because you've kind of gone over the pleasantries and the introductions and all that, and your sound's good, headphones are good. And so I usually, and I'm pretty sure we did this on this session, is you often go back and revisit the songs you did on the first day, and you realize that you played them maybe a little too fast, or just something about the approach wasn't quite right. And so it's just great to be in a position where you can kind of, take another crack at those songs. Even the arrangement might be the exact same. You just play it totally differently. Now that you've settled into it, you're more comfortable. Everything's fitting a little bit better and sounding, just making more sense to you in the headphone and in the playback.
Yeah.
And so, really try and take advantage of that on the 3rd and 4th day, and maybe recut some of those tunes.
18 songs is a lot. Was that the initial goal, was to do that many tunes, or was it just like you were getting through so many and you had a bunch, or did you always plan to go in and do 18?
No, I think we did 13 or 14 with the band. And then I had Sam Bush came by and Mickey Raphael came by to play harp on some stuff, and on 2 separate days.
Okay.
And so it would be kind of a thing where like we would work with the band and then we would let the band leave, and, Sam and I would work the back half of the day, and same thing with Mickey.
Yeah.
So I just so enjoyed working with both of them that basically, like, after we had kind of got them to play on all the tracks that we had envisioned having them on, I just said, do you want to just sit down and play a bit together as a duo? And we sort of rearranged the mics a little bit. And Mickey and I did 3 or 4 tunes, and Sam and I did the same thing. We just sort of, yeah. Cool. And so those things didn't necessarily make it on the record, but I just loved playing with them, and I just thought, geez, like, I mean, this is
it's kind of a cool thing to have in your back pocket too, though, right? Like, who knows?
Totally. And I hope it's not a once in a lifetime thing. But really, even if it was just for me, like, selfishly, I'm, obviously flattered that those guys would come by the studio and play with me, and it was just so fun, just hanging out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hanging out in a cool room, sounded great, good people, and so I played a couple tunes. I just played like older songs, and then I played a couple newer songs that we didn't even cut with the band. Then we did another song that I did with the band, but we did a totally different version. Just stuff like that. It was just more casual.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it was fun.
So for the songs that did make the record, did you cut your vocals live? Do you go back in and redo them? How do you approach singing?
It's a bit of both. You know how it is. Like, sometimes you just get a great one and you almost build the mix around that vocal. It just ends up being the defining thing. And then we did, once we left Nashville, I flew to Toronto in a couple of months later. And we sort of tend to do the mixing and the vocals at the same time. Mm-hmm. Same thing. The mixing, I'm not someone who needs to be there on the couch while you're tweaking the kick drum and getting, you know what I mean? Like, doing all that fine detailed work, which is important work, but I'm just like, it's not helpful for me to be backseat driving, I find, in those. So I tend to,
when you work with people you trust, you don't need to micromanage that shit.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that works better for me. And I know some people like to be much, much more involved in the mix. But yeah, so for me, I tend to kind of want to go into the mix process when it's pretty far along. So in the tracking process, you're kind of mixing as you go, and you're getting a sound that feels realized and full. And so when I went to Toronto, it's sort of like, when I needed to re-sing something, it's like you're almost singing on top of a finished mix.
Right.
Which is
very glorious.
Which is awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome, right? Because you're kind of like, okay, everything is just sounding right the way it should, and you can respond to that dynamically and just emotionally, like the way you want to as a singer. And so yeah, I think it's about half and half. Mm-hmm. There's definitely tunes that we recorded live off the floor at Sound Emporium, and in fact, a lot of the musicians, like, on the third and fourth day, were just, we'd be on a lunch break or a coffee break or something, and they independently came up to me and said, "Hey, like, this is really fun." There's no part of me that wants to be a nostalgia or throwback or vintage or whatever, but the musicians were all kind of telling me that, like, most of the records they work on are done much more like in the more modern Pro Tools, where you're building up the track. You're starting with a beat or something, and you're building up layers of tracks on top of it. And so, they were all kind of like, "This is the way we used to cut records, playing together." It's like, yeah, I mean, that's, there's a reason why it sort of has that appeal, right? Because it just sort of has that conversational quality to it, where the musicians are responding to each other, and the drummer does a little fill, and the bass player kind of just, wow, he locks right in there, and it's like, it's so special.
Yeah, I can never figure out why people are surprised when you work that way. Like, that's the way that I work too, is always with people playing together. I don't have the patience to sit there and like do a bed track of drums and have the bass player play to that. And you start, microscoping every note, and then, overdubbing guitar layers and whatnot. It just doesn't make any sense to me anymore. I guess I used to do that way back in the day, but to me, that's like where all the magic happens.
I think it's just a control thing, right? It's like, there's no doubt, like, when you do it that way, you do have more control. Now, is that better? I mean, that's like, for me, I don't think it's better. And in some cases, it's, like, let's say you have a vocal and that's the vocal, and it sort of forces you to commit to the drum sound or something. And then you get to some point in the process and you're like, the snare drum's bothering me, but I can't really change the snare too much because it's actually the room mic for the vocal. And, all about this stuff, but it's like,
Yeah.
I actually find whatever those frustrating things are in the moment when you're trying to solve them, quite often those are the exact same things that end up becoming your favorite part of the recording is the thing that you didn't plan, that you actually tried to struggle to get rid of and fight against. And then you're listening to it and you're kind of like, I love how that worked out that way,
Yeah.
And it's humbling, right? Because even as much experience as you might have, and we all have our methods that we like to use for recording drums or recording. And then the thing that you actually didn't plan or didn't have any control over is the thing that's special. And it's just so fun and surprising and probably part of the reason why we all keep seeking that out, right? We all want that experience, is that just feeling like you're discovering some new thing that's beyond your control.
Tell me about the vocal sounds. I feel like through your recorded output, you've got, I don't know, is this your sixth record, I think, or sixth record? So it's like, there definitely is some consistency from the beginning of Pink Strat to now, which is like the vocals always seem quite dry to me. They're like really upfront and like loud, but you're clearly singing pretty quiet. I know you've worked with Robbie, is it Lakritz.
Yeah.
So he's been a pretty consistent player in your records for quite a while now too. Is that something, like, conceptually, have you guys ever like talked about that, or is that something that you work on, or is it just the way you sing and the way that you want it to sound?
Actually, I mean, we've certainly discussed it, and we do, we have discussed it. I think I have to really give credit to Feist for that technique. I used to sing a lot louder and try to sort of like communicate the emotional weight of something with volume.
Yeah.
And then she sort of she described it like, just imagine that you're laying on the pillow next to your lover and you have to like tell them something that's the most important, tender thing. What dynamic are you going to do that in? Well, it's probably, yeah, exactly. The thing that's actually your most vulnerable secret, whatever that is, whether it's I love you or guess what, I can't do this anymore and we have to break up, like whatever that thing is, you're probably going to do it. The volume is going to be like this big, and you could take advantage of the power of the microphone and really actually, like, there's just so much sonic information there. And actually I've found that since I started doing that with the vocals, I've found that with almost every instrument. If you think about like a drum, when you hit a drum harder, it's not necessarily like the pleasing parts of the drum that get louder. Sometimes it is. Exactly. But often, especially with bass too, like bass, I love cranking the bass and then just barely touching the string. And there's just so much sort of blooming sound that's just like, it's incredible actually.
Pedal steels like that too. And electric guitar and acoustic guitar. Yeah. It's the biggest trick, I think, that is not that much of a secret, but that nobody seems to understand, is like with recording drums, some of the biggest, hugest drum sounds ever are like
just tight,
super quietly performed,
Well, I worked with James Gadson on this Earthtones record.
I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, and he's a phenomenal player, but I mean, there's some pretty compelling video footage of him thanks to YouTube and all that, or you can see all this stuff now, but he has that ability, right, where it's just like,
he sure does. He's barely touching that snare.
He's barely touching it, and even like, what he's playing might just literally be 4 on the floor, or just like the most basic beat, like what I would call like a Neil Young beat or something like that. But he has that ability that all great players have to just get more out of each quarter note. It just, somehow his quarter note feels this wide. When I hit it, it's like, it's this thin little thing. And when he hits the snare drum, it's just, it's like fills up the entire quarter note, So yeah, I think there's obviously really valuable.
Jay Belleros is like that too.
Totally. Yeah. And so, it's really interesting as a singer to try and apply some of those principles. And Yeah, I think I have been doing that since the beginning.
Was that something that you like, have you developed it and worked on it, or were you just like, oh, I got to sing this way, and then you just did it? Or like, because that's a hard thing to do live, because live, like, there's a lot of pressure to project, and like nerves can get going, and like it's going to make you sing louder. Were you just able to kind of like flip a switch and get into this really dynamic, quieter kind of singing right away?
Live is harder. Live is harder, and I tend to sing louder live.
Okay.
For all the reasons that you mentioned. That being said, like I'll often do like a solo set or something, or some sort of stripped down thing in the middle of the set, and try and bring in some of that dynamic range.
Yeah.
That's more intimate, or more sort of just like more. It's somehow there's a soft power to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like there's a way to own a room with volume, and then there's a way to own a room by just being so vulnerable and tender that people can't help but be on the edge of their seats. And I've been a spectator at shows with other artists who had that quality, you know, and sort of recognized that maybe I had an ability to do a similar thing, and so tried to kind of develop that a little bit over the years. But yeah, I think it's, if you look at all the great, the wisest people throughout time, they often weren't screaming at the top of their lungs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're sort of delivering their message with a sort of quiet confidence that you really have no question, then you have no option, than to just listen.
Yeah.
And whether that information kind of makes it into you and connects with you is comes afterwards. But in terms of a delivery system for moving sort of emotional information from one person to another, I find that sort of soft technique tends to work more consistently for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you learn to develop that part of your voice too. Like Al Green is another good example of somebody who you think would be like screaming, and he's singing super quiet. And even that, like when he does that like super distorted kind of thing, Matt Rossbang told me, who was working with him, and he's like, yeah, everyone thinks that he's overloading the microphone with volume, but he's like, he's not. That's what his voice sounds like, which is crazy. But
yeah, like, the mic is just dimed, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think all instruments kind of are like that. I mean, there are those rare occasions where, you know, Dave Grohl hits the drums hard and it sounds pretty awesome. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
there are exceptions.
But yeah, I think in general, it's. I actually saw David Rawlings and Gillian Welch play in Toronto at this club, and it sounded so good. And at one point, you know how he moves around so much when he's playing, he just brushed the mic, which was just a 57.
Yeah.
He just brushed it, and it was like the loudest sound like I had ever heard. Like everyone went like that, like as if the ceiling was going to collapse.
Yeah.
And you realize the mic is just wound right out, and all the dynamics, all that moving around, and the way he's playing is it's just incredible how much range there is there that he's in complete control of, you know?
Yeah.
Really cool.
So tell me about some of the other players on this record. So you mentioned Sam Bush and Mickey Raphael. So those guys, they came in as overdubs.
Yeah. They played a little bit with the band. Like we do like half the day, you know, as part of the band. And then we'd sort of break the band and like I said, sort of try and do some overdubs with them on tracks that we had cut the previous day or whatever. So
the steel stuff, I think it's Russ Pahl plays all the steel, right?
Yeah.
That
guy. You know Russ?
Yeah, I know Russ. Yeah. He's awesome.
Yeah, he's just a phenomenal guy.
But he sounds more intertwined in the tracking. Like, was he playing live with you guys? Okay.
No, he was in the band. And actually, like his guitar playing, I'm sure he'll forgive my ignorance, but I didn't really know he was a guitar player too, because I find a lot of steel players, especially in Nashville, it's like, this is what I do, you know, but his guitar playing was just really great. And
he's also one of the most recorded banjo players in history.
See, I didn't know that. Yeah. I had no idea. And if you said he played mandolin and did all this other stuff, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, he's really a knowledgeable and talented guy, and knew a lot about Red Wing boots, and he just knew about cool stuff.
He winds his own pickups and shit. You know,
Does he?
Oh yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah, for the steel, but
Wow.
also
Well,
for guitar. Like if you ever want really weird, cool guitar pickups, he's got all this crazy shit in his basement where he just like winds them himself, and it's pretty cool.
yeah, he likes having projects
Yeah.
and yeah, so we had some nice hangs just even on the breaks and stuff. But yeah, he's a phenomenal steel player for sure. Added a lot for, you know.
So the concept of this record, which is, I would say, sort of country tinged, but it's certainly not like a country record, even though like I would imagine people are going to say it's the Bahamas country record, but it's not a country record, although there's definitely like a couple songs that are pretty honky tonkish. But was
For sure.
having the steel as such a prominent voice kind of brings you into that world a little bit. Was that like what you set out to do, like with the songwriting and stuff as well? Or like when did that come into focus that you were going to do that and like have the pedal steel be a part of it and like have this sound that was sort of like what it is?
I mean, the whole thing kind of kicked off during the pandemic when we did these remote recordings.
Yeah.
And I worked with Russ and Dave Rowe and Dan Knobler for those sessions where we're doing these remote things. And so as soon as we did that, I thought, geez, I mean, that was so cool. Like if I could only get down there, then we would really have something special. And so then I started writing material with that in mind and trying to pick songs that I had already written that might fit in that dynamic. And, but yeah, I never said like, I want to make a country record or a nostalgic record or anything like that. I kind of think like, it's like Ray Charles made a country record and Neil Young made a country record and Bob Dylan recorded in Nashville. It's like, it's really those players. I wanted to work with those players, you know?
Yeah.
And definitely as soon as you start to put the pedal steel on things, it has a tendency to just lean into that thing that much harder.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd say the biggest thing was just choosing the material that fit that group of players and really kind of allowed them to step out and just contribute all that, you know, great stuff to it and really elevate the songs. But
the core band was you and so Dave Rowe on bass, who was like Johnny Cash's bass player, phenomenal, you know, old school Nashville dude. Russ Pahl, who was playing drums on the bulk of it?
The drums was this guy John Radford, and in fact, the day before, we were meant to have Brady Blade.
Oh yeah,
who I didn't know, but you know, came highly recommended. And honestly, the only criteria I said to my manager was like, I just want to work with people in their 70s, and
cool.
And so
I totally get that.
We had Gene Chrisman, who had played on this session. So it was basically Russ Pahl, Dave Rowe, and Gene Chrisman.
Yeah.
And Dan Knobler was playing guitar and sort of acting as a band leader and, you know, running the session and stuff. And so Gene Chrisman broke his arm a couple weeks before the session. So then we got Brady Blade, who we had to make an exception because I think he's in his 60s.
And doesn't he live in? And then doesn't he live in Sweden?
I didn't know that at the time, but apparently he lives in Sweden. But I guess he works in Nashville a fair bit. Then he had a COVID, so he wasn't able to come.
Oh, shit.
And then, you know, so I was panicking for a couple of minutes, and then Dan was like, this is Nashville. There's like 10 A-list drummers, like just, you know, and, you know, I don't mean to be ignorant about it, but I just said, you just find someone. Like, I'm not like super knowledgeable about all the guys that are working and available. And so he called John, and John first of all, he knew my music, which was kind of flattering and cool that he was aware of it and hip to it. And he was available, said, hey, can you work tomorrow for 4 days? And he's like, sure, let's do it. And that worked out great. He's a phenomenal player and was the youngest of the band. And he was psyched to work with Dave and Russ and everybody. So that was cool to have the band, and they were just played so beautifully together.
And Jen Gunderman, was she overdubbing or was she as part of the?
And Jen Gunderman she came for 1 day and was part of the band.
Yeah.
And
she's awesome.
And so, yeah, we kind of did that thing where like there was the core band, and then one day we had Jen Gunderman, and then the next day we had Sam Bush, and then the next day we had Mickey Raphael, like always kind of add in like an extra ingredient, an extra instrument to that core. And, you know, again, try and pick the material that would fit that player for that day type of thing, you know? And
Do you ever run into like nerves and like, does it freak you out walking into Sound Emporium and have a bunch of 70-year-old seasoned vets sitting there ready to go, or are you just excited and happy to be there?
You know what? As I hope this doesn't sound arrogant, but as long as the songs are really good, no, I don't feel nervous or intimidated at all.
Yeah.
As long as I've done the work ahead of time and I know that the material is like the best it could be,
yeah,
and I know that I can actually sing it and deliver it, then I feel like I can hold my own with those guys, right? Like they're phenomenal musicians and would clean the floor with me just on a musical basis. But as a songwriter, I feel like I can be there, and I'm worthy of being there, and I'm worthy of having all of them there.
Yeah.
Support the song, you know?
It's the right attitude to have.
Yeah, for sure. So I just try and do a lot of work on the front end, so that I just show up with the best possible material that I can.
So I'm curious about that aspect of things, like how prepared do you actually come? So take a tune like Into the Unknown on the new record, which to me is really interesting because like it's very like the melodies are very like carefully laid out. The bass playing is insane and like pretty adventurous for that style. Tell me a bit about like, do you come in to a session like that with all the vocal nuances kind of work? Like, I don't mean the performance exactly, but like as far as like things that you're going to harmonize, like little vocal melodies that happen through a song like that. How much of that stuff do you have like in your back pocket ready to go versus what happens on the fly?
I think it's 50-50. I think
that much.
I think that I, like a lot of people, like I really do subscribe to that idea of like, if you can make it sound good with just acoustic guitar and vocal,
yeah,
that's a good sign. That's a good indication that you have something that's worthy, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, on a song like Into the Unknown, like the guitar playing has the melody in it. It has everything. It has all the information in it in terms of how the song should go.
Yeah.
So that is a good example of like when we're like, there isn't much discussion. Just sort of kick it off, and right away the band kind of settled into that groove, you know?
Did you have to push Dave to like get a little wiggy in there, or was he just like, hey, I'm going to do this?
The only version of me pushing Dave, because he played upright a fair bit.
Yeah. And
anytime I felt like I kind of wanted things to be more quote unquote exciting, I just said, hey, Dave, why don't you try playing electric?
Okay.
And he was, thrilled, and
he's a great
just has a great P-bass, great electric player. And he really has a couple tracks. In fact, he's got on one song, the song I'm Still, we got to the end, which sort of the song ends on this big guitar solo that I did. And then I was just loving the groove so much. I was kind of just like signaling to the band, like, keep going, keep going.
Yeah. And
then I was pointing at Dave, like, just like, keep going. Like I don't think he really knew that he was doing a bass solo, but everyone else was just hanging.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just right at the end of the track. And it's like, was a guitar solo that kind of builds and builds and builds. And then the band kind of just keeps this groove going for another minute and a half or whatever. And the bass is just exploring the space in such a fun way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was a classic, right? Like everybody in the studio kind of laughed afterwards, like, oh my God, haha, we did a bass solo, and he was laughing, and
it's
I was
such a
like,
cool moment.
I was like, dude, that's part of the song now. It's like, that's staying for sure. He's like, no. But then he sent me a text a couple weeks ago just saying he was, apparently it's his first bass solo on record.
Come on.
And he's been cutting records for a long time. And I was like, dude, I'm honored. It's but anyway, it's he's a phenomenal player for sure. And he really did. He's one of those guys that tends to lead the band.
Yep.
There's a producer and then there's the artist, but he really is someone who he'll pipe in with his ideas, and often his ideas are good ones. And he introduced me to this word diamond, which I didn't know anything about.
It's a Nashville word. We call them goose eggs in Canada.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, on like day 3 or something, like they're like, should we put a diamond on that? And then, I said, okay, guys, you got to tell me, what the hell are you saying? What's diamond? It's like, it's a whole note. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I called them goose eggs for about 5 years when I lived down here, and everyone just laughed laughed at me basically for 5 minutes
Yeah.
after I would say goose egg. So I started saying diamond too.
It works pretty good.
It does. Yeah. It's a common language. So what about all the touches on a tune like that? Like the backup vocals are really cool and definitely like well thought out. And there's quite a few layers of all that stuff. I think there's a bass harmonica, if I'm hearing that correctly, on that track.
Yeah.
There's probably some mellotron on there or something. Does that stuff all kind of get built as overdubs, or how do you approach that?
The backup vocals certainly were done as overdubs. Especially in the bridge and stuff, like I had this this melody, this reoccurring melody, and I sang a lot of that. And then Felicity, who tours with me and has sang on a bunch of my recordings, like she came in and she sang on that track, and she sang on Sports Car. And she's incredible. But yeah, that was done as an overdub. And
what about the bass harmonica?
The bass harmonica, I'm trying to remember if he was doing that live or how we did that, but
that's such a wicked instrument.
It is a crazy instrument, and I'm kind of shocked actually that it made it on there, frankly, because It's like, no, I'm glad that it did. I just mean it's sort of like it's like B3 or something. It's like once it's in, it's very hard to just come out.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. So the way he played it in that pulsing,
it's a Nashville staple. Like it's been a big part of pop music here for 50 years. But
yeah,
a lot of people don't realize that.
I haven't really tuned into that, but it was really cool to hear him do that, and he did this sort of pulsing rhythmic thing, as almost a call and response to the main phrase of the chorus, and it just fit perfectly. It was like, that's it. We don't, because I always thought that, because we did have some lap steel fills and things like that responding, and but that bass harmonica thing just adds so much,
So what about your guitar stuff on this record? Like there's a few guitar players, so I don't know who's doing what, but like, are you doing solos? Are you just playing, like, what's your role on this record?
I played mostly acoustic guitar and sang.
Yeah.
And then I did part one of the solos on that tune, working on my guitar, and Vince Gill did the other one. We did like a classic Vince. Nashville sort of back and forth,
Yeah.
And mine's all fuzzed out and kind of like Bahamas style. And then when he comes in, it's like the perfect Telecaster tone. It's like to the point where I'm like, is this just a plug-in that you have ready to go? Like I wouldn't be surprised. Like, well, I know that he's got like a crazy guitar collection, but I just like the sound was just like perfect. He only sent one thing, and he just said, hey, like, no problem. If you don't like it, no problem at all. But that's what I was hearing.
Oh, so
it was like the perfect thing.
He sent that track to you. He wasn't there when you guys did that.
Yeah, I don't know. His mother had some health problems or something. He was going to come to the studio, and then he wasn't able to come at the last minute. And again, I was just like totally blown away that he was even going to be a part of this thing. But
did you have him in mind for that song? Like, was that something that you thoued about?
I was wanting him to be part of the band. I was like,
okay.
Because I know he loves to play and loves to hang with musicians. And I was like, listen, like, I'm sure it'd be cool to like have a track that says featuring Vince Gill, but I would rather just have you come and be part of the band and like play guitar and hang out, and he's got obviously a great harmony singing voice. That was like, but anyway, so he wasn't able to come, and I was a bit bummed. And then, when he offered to just like, if you want to send me some tracks, I can play, because he's got a studio at home too. Right. So
yeah.
He was able to do that and send it back, which was really, really cool.
Had you met him and played with him somewhere? Like, what was the relationship with him?
No, I've never met him. And, what's strange is like this record, Earthtones, that I made in 2017, I didn't realize that had kind of had such an effect in Nashville. Like a lot of musicians that I've met in Nashville know that record, and they cite that record to me. They're like, oh man, I love the sound, I love the playing. But that's the least country record that I've done. But for whatever reason, that something about that record really connected down there.
Yeah.
And it's like one of those things where musicians would pass it to other musicians, and some of them for sonic reasons and others for songwriting or guitar playing, or, you know what I mean? It was like, it just kind of made its way amongst musicians, which of course is like, that's the thing. You can't plan that. And I'm just flattered and surprised whenever that happens. But
that's the one that Pino Paladino and James Gadson play on, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And Christine Bougie, who plays guitar with me, is all over that record. Her and I have been playing together she's amazing. She's like my favorite player, man. She's just so good. So anyway, yeah, I think that, like, Dan Knobler, Russ, Dave, like all these guys, and John Radford, like they'd all heard of this music before we worked together, which was awesome, Yeah. And I don't know how we got hooked up with Vince, but I'm glad that we did. Somehow. But I think it was just like a musician to musician thing. You know what I mean? It was like someone in that circle was just like, hey, I'm working on this cool thing. Do you want to be a part of it?
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, that sounds rad. And ultimately he was able to do something for it, which was really cool. But
that's awesome.
It is awesome. I'm playing next week at the Opry, and I asked him to play with me. Unfortunately, he's playing with the Eagles, so he can't. He's like, I'd love to, but I got to go out with the Knuckleheads again. And I was like, yeah, oh right, you're the lead singer of the Eagles. I kind of forgot, but at some point we'll get together and hang out. And I have an old Blackguard guitar that I was able to buy a while ago, and I know he's like a huge guitar collector too. So I'd love to just
degenerate guitar fiend.
I know. Yeah. And I typically am not like a huge gear guy. Like I do love old guitars, and I'm lucky to have a few nice ones, but I feel like with him, I would love to go deep on the Bakelite pickguard of, you know what I mean? It's just totally. Like, that would be the guy to go deep with, or him and Colin Cripps would be like the
Cripps
two people to kind of
too. Yeah.
For sure.
I know at one point you were playing one of those Nacho Telecasters. Is that still your?
Yeah, I still have it. It's not here. It's in Toronto. It's getting shipped out, I guess. But
is that your guitar of choice still?
You know what? I love it.
Yeah,
it's a great guitar. I don't know if you've played one, but it's I
have not
phenomenal
played one.
Guitar.
They're hard to come by. I've never.
They are.
Yeah. Okay.
So I had been I had heard about them because I wanted a Blackguard and just couldn't make it happen at the time. And so then I got hipped onto these Nacho guitars and found out that like every serious tele player, this is the one, right? It's like the one that people take on the road. And Brad Paisley, was texting Brad Paisley about, he's a crazy guitar collector too. And he's got all these Blackguards. And in fact, he restores them and refinishes them and does stuff, a bit of a luthier himself. But
really,
anyway, yeah, he's, he's got a lot of different hobbies. Sounds like he's into a lot of different stuff. But anyway, the Nacho guitar, I've been looking for one, and then I found one in New Brunswick. Like one came up for sale on Reverb, and it was in New Brunswick. So I wrote the guy. I was like, "Hey, I'm in Nova Scotia. Like, can I just drive up and try it?" And he's like, "Yeah, for sure." I drove up there. We drank coffee. We played guitar for a bit, and I was like, "All right, like, I'll take it. I'd love to buy this guitar." Like I'm like, he wanted cash, or I don't even know if he said he wanted cash. But anyway, I didn't have cash, and I said, "Let me just run downtown to the bank, and I'll get cash and come back." And he's like, "You know what? Just take it. Just mail me a check." And so the guy let me walk away with this like pretty valuable guitar.
Yeah, they're not cheap.
I just thought it was such a cool like Canadian, testament to all the goodwill that still exists amongst Canadians and amongst musicians and stuff. Like the guy just let me leave with this guitar, and I sent him a check, and it all worked out, But anyway, all that to say is if you get a chance to play one, they're really, really good. And now I since then I have been able to, I have a Blackguard, and it's a monster guitar for sure. But this thing is pretty damn close, In fact, I'd say it's just sort of different. It's just different. It's like, it's its own thing, but it's, cool.
Is the tele thing for you? Does it kind of do everything that you need a guitar to do as far as like, I mean, you're a really well-versed guitar player. You were like a kind of a session guy around Toronto for a long time, and played with a lot of different bands. For me, I'm kind of the same. Like I play different instruments, but when I'm playing an electric guitar, a tele just feels like pretty much everything I could ever need, except for maybe 10% of the time. What's your take on that?
Well, I describe it almost exactly the same. I describe it as a pair of Levi's. It's like, to me, that's just like a pair of Levi's. You can wear a pair of Levi's in 90 or 95% of the situations. You can just walk in, you have a good, comfortable pair of jeans, looks good, comfortable. You can work in it, you can play in it. You know what I mean? You could go to a formal event in black jeans or whatever. But the main thing for me, the main evolution for me was like when I started and I was playing as a duo, I tended to favor, like I played those silver tone guitars, like things that had a pickup that had a much higher output.
Yeah.
And it has a lot more low end and just like a much bigger sound.
Like maybe to compensate for the lack of bass player. Is that sort of what you were?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I sort of gravitated. And then as the band got bigger and I started playing with Christine and I got a bass player and, there's just more, like suddenly I wanted my guitar playing to just be like another part of the band as opposed to be this featured thing,
Yeah.
And the Telecaster just became, I don't know, I think I started maybe 2018. I started playing the Telecaster. I haven't really played much else since then.
Oh, wow. Cool.
So yeah, I still have those other guitars and they're all really cool. And I don't have a studio or a way to have them all out. Like they're all in cases and some of them are in Toronto and some of them, but I tend to reach for that one. And I mean, it just works so well. It's like, it's just such a tool.
Yeah.
And
when you do a show, are you just like a one guitar guy? I guess you have an acoustic and an electric, but do you bring a couple electrics out with you or just the one?
I've done a lot of touring with just one.
Oh, cool.
And now I have a second one that's just like a backup one, if I do a song in drop D or something like that, it's nice to have a second one, but man, it makes things so much easier. And Christine's really been an inspiration for that, right? It's like she bought a guitar at Long and McQuaid in like 1997, and that's been the guitar that she's always had and always played. She always sounds great.
Yeah.
And it's not, it's not some special vintage guitar. It's just, that's her guitar and it sounds awesome. And it's a Tele. So, yeah, she's a really inspiration, but it's kind of like, in many cases, I think the less is more thing just really appeals to me, right? I don't have any patience for like pedals not working, things like that. And so I've done lots of tours with one guitar and no pedal board, just plug right into the amp and that there's never any problems. It's shocking.
And it sounds amazing. It just sounds with good. No shit in between you. Yeah.
So
you do
you're always kind of riding that line, right? Because it's nice to have, I do have pedals and, I have a tuner and I have some other reverb or whatever stuff down there, but I just want it to be functional, I never want to just switch to a different sound because suddenly it's the chorus and we need to have this new sound or whatever. It's more like textural and really like, is there something that's really elevating the song? And is there really any effect that elevates the song? It's like, well, a lot of that you can do with your playing,
Totally. Well, the one effect that I hear in your music that comes and goes through many of the records is like a fuzz kind of thing. And there's some crazy fuzz stuff on the new record too. Is that you playing that, or is that Dan Nobler?
Yes.
That's
there's a lot of it that's me, and there's a lot of it that's Dan too. But
what do you use to get your fuzz craziness? You just crank
it up.
Yeah.
Just crank it up. I mean, I have a Fender Champ there, which that works. It's kind of like the Tele. It works in most scenarios.
Yeah.
Even I have this more recently. I got this Milkman amp, which I don't know if you're familiar with those.
Yeah, because that guy's he's a steel player, and those amps are originally designed for pedal steels. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that one I've actually I used a fair bit on some different recordings that I've done, and it's the same thing. When you dime that out, you can get some really cool fuzzy tones out of that, But I think it's just between the guitar and the amp, there's a whole world there that you can mess with, right?
Yeah.
And so I lately, when I say lately, I mean the last few years, like whenever I go to that fuzz tone, I generally right away just roll the tone all the way off.
Yeah.
And especially if you're playing dry with no reverb or anything like that, I just love that sound. It's just so cool. It's almost percussive and it just makes you play really rhythmically and just in interesting ways,
Do you ever record
So,
straight into the console? Like it almost sounds like some of the guitar tones are like right there.
oh yeah.
And okay.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, for sure. That's like a huge move for sure. The Earthtones record is basically the whole record is just like direct into the console, right?
Oh wow.
Um, yeah, it's there's so many layers of guitar but when you like, you can't really play a chord when you DI it, as you know, like a
That's
chord
right.
is just not a pleasing sound. So again, it forces you to play single notes, and maybe you could do double stops and stuff, but what it allows you to do is put a lot, you can layer that up. So sometimes you can do 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8 tracks of guitar, and all of it can be sitting right at the edge, right at the front of the speaker, without it being overwhelming. It all kind of just like what the acoustic science is there, but for whatever reason, that's harder to do when you use an amp and a mic and you're introducing all these other things into the signal path.
Totally. Yeah.
But yeah, it almost becomes like the way you can do it with keyboards. You can layer it up like that, So I'm not sure if it's because of the DI directly, but it's cool. It's a nice effect. I like that. But lately I've been listening to this band Goose, which I've never been like. Well, they're I guess they're kind of like a new jam band. They're carrying the torch of the Fish and the that sort of world, but they're kind of the opposite of everything I would do. Their songs are like 20 minutes long, and they go to all these crazy places, and they're a million fuzz boxes, like the pedal boards like this big, and crazy dexterous playing, really a lot of stuff happening.
Yeah.
And it's almost kind of been a gateway drug for me to get into that type of music and that type of playing and really understand it. Because for so long, I just was like, I don't get this. It doesn't speak to me,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's kind of cool to think that there's always more music, right? If you feel like you get to the end of something, it's like there's a whole other genre, there's a style. Exactly. You're never done.
Yeah.
And I've said this a couple of times now, but I really do like, these guys that I work with in Nashville, like they're doing the thing that I want to be doing when I'm their age, right? Like when I'm 70, if the phone rings and some like 42-year-old guy wants me to come play on the record, it's like, it's probably going to be yes.
Yeah.
Cause I'm just interested in music and want to be part of like cool things and make interesting things, So I've been fortunate to be part of a lot of interesting things up to this point. And if it ended tomorrow, I could only be grateful, but hopefully it keeps going for quite a while,
Yeah, man. So you're putting this record out. I would imagine you're doing a lot of touring. What's your live band? Is it Darcy Yates and Christine Bougie?
Yeah, Christine and Darcy, and Felicity comes, and this guy Josh Fantasso is playing drums, and he's actually from here. He lives in Nova Scotia.
Okay.
But I mean, I've never been like super determined to like recreate things note for note live,
right.
Like, I mean, to the point where I played as a duo for many years, right? It's like, there was no chance to recreate things, but the band is really strong. I mean, I've recorded with all these people too, and they're just really fantastic musicians. And Christine plays lap steel, and so there's ways she can
play lap like pedal, like she can
totally.
Yeah, she can pull that off.
She can totally pull it off, and so we started playing a few of the newer ones this summer, which was really fun, and we'll get into it over the fall. But
so do you bring your band for the Opry, or are you using the house band?
I didn't even know bringing my band was an option.
Yeah,
I'm just playing with them. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, geez, you're telling me a bit too late. No, we're using the Opry band, and Sam's going to come and play, and Dan Knobler's going to play as well. But
great.
It feels like it's cool to just, I know everybody says this, but it's like, it's nice to be included in the history and the tradition of that place. But I kind of enjoy just like going to situations like that, or like Mountain Stage or E-Town or things like that, where it's like they have a thing that they do and you just plug into their thing for that couple hours and, just try and then enjoy the experience, right?
Yeah.
And then go your separate ways, right? Yeah. I in the past, when I've tried to like, I don't know, flex and try and make them do it my way, that never works as good. Totally. It's better to just be better just be along for the ride kind of thing. And
Yeah.
I mean, no doubt that they're good players, and I'm sure it's going to be awesome. And in fact, some of the singers sang on this record, like the Opry singers. They're on like 3 or 4 tracks.
Yeah, Tanya Hencheroff. I noticed her in the credits, and she's from Vancouver. That's
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's cool.
But she's in the Opry House Band, and I saw she's on your record, so I assumed.
Yeah.
That's wicked.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to going there. It's gonna be cool. I got to get my jeans ready and my Telecaster ready to go. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'll let you go, but thanks so much for hanging out, talking today. So, are you playing a show, like an actual show in Nashville, or is it just
we're playing for Americana Fest. We're playing at Brooklyn Bowl.
Oh,
Brooklyn Bowl.
Yeah, that's a great venue.
I think it's on Thursday. Is that right? Yeah, I think we're playing Thursday. Tuesday I'll play at I think it's at the Bluebird actually. It's some songwriter workshop kind of thing. And then Wednesday we'll do the Opry, and Thursday I'll do the show. So it's sort of like get to do 3 different cool things, be in Nashville for 3 days and do 3 different things, which is for me, it's I get my money's worth out of a trip to Nashville, Yeah.
So you've got your regular band for the Brooklyn Bowl show, I assume.
Yeah. Right. They'll fly in. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, I hope I can get out to see that one. So that's like a multiple artist kind of thing. That's like,
I think so. I think it's like it's like a festival type of thing. I think there's 4 or 5 acts on the bill, but please come if you can. It'd be great.
I will. Wicked.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks for the time, man. I really appreciate it, and nice to see you again.
Yeah, likewise, man. My pleasure. And best of luck down there in Nashville. I'd like to come by. Your studio looks pretty good, man.
Anytime. Yeah, if you have
you got it all dialed in there.
Well, it's all right. It works pretty good.
You made a record with Chris Ludica, right?
Yeah, a few. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just did a record for him. I produced a record for him
oh, cool.
last year. Yeah. And we did it here in Nova Scotia.
Oh, wicked.
I'll get him to send it to you, man. It's really weird.
Is it out yet?
It's no, I think it's going to come out next year. We're trying to find a label, and I think he's got something lined up now. But in any case, it's cool. He's such a fun guy. And
are you doing more production stuff? Is that a thing for you going forward?
I'm trying to. I did this last Doug Paisley record, which was really fun, and this Old Man Ludica record. I tend to find like middle-aged musicians who have sort of found themselves like, feeling like maybe their career's over. Those are the guys that I gravitate towards too.
Doug's hilarious, man. I grew up across the street from Doug Paisley.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Really funny guy and super talented. But yeah, you should check out his last record if you haven't heard it. It turned out really good.
Cool.
And was super fun. We actually recorded it at the same studio that I did the Sad Hunk record at. And it was like the studio that basically existed for those 2 albums, and then it's gone. It was just an incredible place.
Toronto?
In Toronto, yeah. It really, just such a cool room. And they had those barefoot speakers, man. Those monitors that are like, those are insane. I found myself like, we were supposed to work until 6. And then I'd be like, at 5, I'd be like, that was a good day. Why don't we just call it? And then I would just listen to like Dr. Dre for an hour.
On the
and then the next day, it'd be like, let's call it at 4 p.m. and like, let's just listen to something else. These are just incredible, those things.
These Atomics are kind of like that. They have this big subwoofer on the back that fires backwards, and it's just like they're insane. They have that, like, it just shakes your whole core if you turn it up loud enough.
Yeah, I think I'm getting to a point where in my life where I might like to have a good stereo. I've never had one, and actually, my wife has a Volvo, and it has quite a nice stereo, and it's like probably the best stereo we have. But at the cottage, I have a CD player, and I just listen to so much more music out there, right? Like it sounds sad to say, but like I don't listen to a ton of music. There's just podcasts. There's all these other things now to compete, and so when we go out there, I just put a CD on and just like, just enjoy it in a way that I did when I was like a teenager or something. And I'm almost embarrassed to say that, but listening to music is fun.
It is. It sure
and also
is.
CDs, like, and people just give you CDs. Nobody wants them anymore.
I know.
And I've kind of realized that it's like we used to collect records because they were cheap or nobody wanted them. And now vinyl's I'm embarrassed to charge what we have to charge for the vinyl.
It's outrageous. Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah. So now when I got the CD player and I told people, they're like, oh, like, you don't remember those big black binders of people who just throw away the jewel cases?
Yeah.
I have like a bunch of those at the cottage now. I know like there's a lot of weird garbage in there. I didn't know Pearl Jam had so many bootlegs, but anyway, I got a nice Blue Rodeo CD and I got some other nice material out there, but it's been really fun just being like leafing through this thing and being like, oh, cool. Like, let's listen to Bob Marley's Legend for the, you know,
and CDs sound pretty good too.
Time. It's like, it sounds great. I think, I don't know. I think if I wanted to go with the vinyl route, then you got to drop the serious cake, you know?
That's right. All right. Well, thanks, man.
Great talking to you.
You too. Yeah. And have a good trip down here and have a great tour and all that stuff. And hope to see you.
Right on. Appreciate it. Thanks, Steve.
Okay. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening, everybody. Music Makers and Soul Shakers podcast is produced at the Hen House Studio in East Nashville, Tennessee. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. You can find more info on this episode, including show notes and an audio playlist for Spotify and Apple Music at makersandShakerspodcast.com. Thank you again to our sponsors this season, Union Tube and Transistor, Spectra 1964, the Deering Banjo Company, Mule Resonator Guitars, and the Hen House Hang. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time for another chilling episode of Music Makers and Soul Shakers. Over and out.